Thanks for starting your week with us. Hello and welcome to Business Daily. I'm Lee Ji-yoon in Seoul. We have plenty on our plate today, so let's get started with a look at the day's highlights. Korean exports fall at the fastest pace in 3 months in July, doing worse than expected and putting a damper on the country's efforts to revitalize the sluggish economy. Korean stock markets stay open for 30 more minutes starting today, marking the first trading hour revision in 16 years by the country's exchange operator. These stories and more coming right up. The negative news on the trade front continues to roll in, with Korea's exports falling for the longest period ever now. But there might be some light at the end of the tunnel, as the figures could improve towards the latter half of the year. Our Kim Min-ji starts us off.
Korea's exports took another dive in July, extending the downward trend to a record 19th straight month. The Trade Ministry says outbound shipments tumbled 10.2% from a year ago to $41 billion. There had been some hope for recovery after the pace of decline had slowed for the previous 2 months, but July's figure puts the drop back in double digits seen earlier in the year. Still, the fall was mainly attributed to temporary factors, such as fewer working days in the month, as well as a slump in ship exports.
When excluding temporary factors, the pace of decline in average daily exports in July was the lowest this year, so we believe it has maintained its recovery momentum.
But a spike in computer shipments and a slowing contraction in Korea's key export items, such as flat panel displays and petroleum goods, weren't enough to prop up the overall figures. Making matters worse, exports of ships plunged more than 40% on year due to delays in delivery, while shipments of cars also slid due to slow demand in emerging markets and strikes, which took a toll on production. Imports, on the other hand, fell 14% on year to $33.3 billion, also nosediving for the 19th straight month. With that, the trade surplus came to $7.8 billion in July, extending the surplus streak to 54 straight months. For the latter half of the year, the general consensus is that figures will gradually improve.
Although it's hard to say things are on a track of recovery, the pace of decline will slow, since it doesn't seem that oil prices will fall much further. Also, releases of new tech products will likely boost exports, and there'll also be a base effect as outbound shipments fell a lot last year.
As for unfavorable conditions ahead, experts cite a supply glut from China, as well as a slowdown in emerging economies. Rather than providing industries with general measures to boost overall exports, analysts say the government needs to offer more customized support so companies can come up with new products that other countries have yet to develop. Kim Min-ji, Business Daily.
Meanwhile, Korea's current account surplus hit a record high in June, extending its surplus streak for a 52nd straight month. The Bank of Korea said the estimated surplus in June reached nearly $12.2 billion, with the help of a widening surplus in the goods balance. The previous monthly record was nearly $11.9 billion in June last year. Exports increased to 6.6% from May, while imports increased by 2.3%. The deficit in the service sector rose from $1.1 billion in May to nearly $1.4 billion. Sales at duty-free shops are on the road to recovery thanks to a rebound in tourist numbers. According to Statistics Korea and Korea Customs Service on Monday, sales at duty-free shops in June rose almost 95%, nearly double the amount from the year before. Now, part of the surge is attributed to the base effect from last year as tourist numbers plunged during an outbreak of the Middle East respiratory syndrome. This year, twice the number of Chinese tourists visited Korea in June, especially after that hit TV drama Descendants of the Sun was released. Experts say, however, that duty-free shops will have to broaden their target market to include Southeast Asian tourists, as political issues such as Seoul's THAAD deployment opposed by Beijing could lead to a drop in Chinese tourists. Investors will have an extra 30 minutes a day to trade stocks and other commodities on Korea's markets starting from today. The Korea Exchange expects the extension to give a much-needed boost to the country's benchmark index that has been stuck between the 1900 and 2100 mark for years. Our Kim Mo-kyun has more.
Korea Exchange has announced Korea's stock and foreign exchange markets and gold exchange will extend their trading hours by 30 minutes from August 1st. The opening time will remain the same at 9 a.m., but the regular session for the stock and gold markets will close half an hour later at 3:30 p.m. Derivatives trading will end at 3:45 instead of 3:15. But Korea Exchange decided to cut 30 minutes from after-hours trading, which will now run from 3:40 to 6 p.m. The latest move marks the first change in 16 years. In the year 2000, the market operator eliminated the lunch hour break. The trading hours of Asian stock markets are generally shorter than other parts of the world, with Japan operating for 5 hours a day and China just 4. Advanced markets such as those in the U.S. operate for 6.5 hours a day, while Britain and Germany's markets are open for 8.5 hours each. Korea Exchange predicts the 30 minutes extension will see an 8% increase in trade volume, raising daily transactions by up to $610 million. It's also expected to help the domestic stock market escape from the box pattern, which the Kospi has been locked in for more than 6 years.
The extension will give investors more transaction opportunities and the chance to make use of China-related products more efficiently. It will also help Korea escape from the so-called Box P.
However, competition with Beijing is expected to grow since the extended hours will allow investors to reflect market information from the Chinese market, which closes at 4 p.m. Korea time. Kim Mo-kyun, Business Daily.
And to tell us more about last week and this week's stock market action, we have our Business Daily's markets contributor, Choi Jin-seok, joining us on the phone today. Hello, Jin-seok.
Good afternoon, Jim.
All right, let's get started by looking at the Korean stock market. Tell us about the last day of trade and the market's overall performance last week.
On Friday, the Kospi closed at 2016.19, down 0.2% compared to the previous session, while the Kosdaq rose by 0.3% to close at 706.24. The Kospi began the session with a slight uptick, but it raised its intraday gains after the Bank of Japan, or the BOJ, announced its policy committee results. The BOJ decided to keep its monetary policy as is, apart from expanding its purchase of exchange-traded funds, or the ETFs. The Japanese stock market once fell by as much as 1% during the session due to market disappointment. On a weekly basis, the Kospi rose by 0.29% compared to the previous week. The index rose to 2027 on Tuesday, recording a new high for this year. But global central bank meetings, including the Federal Reserve's Federal Open Market Committee, or the FOMC, and the BOJ meeting didn't cause radical moves in the market.
Then how did the Korean stock market close on the first day of this week? As we heard, today was the first day of trade after that 30-minute extension.
The Korean equity market opened the first session of August also with a strong footing. The Kospi rose by 0.6% to close at 2029.61. The index once touched above 2030, helped by foreign investors who bought massive amounts of shares in both the spot trading and futures market. Blue chip stocks, including Samsung Electronics, Hyundai Motor Group, Hyundai Mobis, and SK Hynix led a rally in the market as well. Foreign investors have been the net buyer of the market in the past 18 sessions. The Kosdaq, however, fell slightly by 0.3% to close at 703. The index had been in the positive territory throughout early trading hours, but soon gave up intraday gains due to the sell-off by both foreigners and institutions.
Now, it looks like after a very busy week last week, there won't be a lot of major market events in the first week of this month.
Right, but still, corporate earnings from both the US and Korea are expected to draw attention from investors. Tesla will disclose its quarterly results on Wednesday local time. Since the company is one of the big names in the technology sector and on the Nasdaq, its earnings are expected to have an impact on the entire market. The earnings picture in both countries doesn't look that bad so far, with 63% of the companies from the S&P 500 reporting earnings to date for Q2. The blended earnings decline is at 3.8%, better than the estimate of minus 5.5% on June 30. Meanwhile, back at home, out of 23 companies with market capitalization of more than 5 trillion Korean won, 18 have reported better than expected earnings as well.
So what economic data should investors take a closer look at this week?
Yeah, as always, the U.S. employment report from July is set for release on Friday, which a lot of people will be closely watching. CME Fed Watch, a futures market betting on interest rate hike schedules in the U.S., now indicates an 88% probability of a Fed rate freeze at its September meeting. But if the U.S. labor market created significantly more jobs compared to the estimate 2 months in a row, the probability can surge anytime. Market experts expect 180,000 jobs were created in last month, lower than the 287,000 in the previous month. This has been Choi Jin-seop for Business Daily.
It sells everything from books, vitamins, concert tickets to plane tickets. And now the major online shopping mall Interpark has become the latest victim to a major data breach. Police believe the hack attack was the work of North Korean agents. And our Eunice Kim takes a look back at major attacks and what might have led to the latest breach.
13.2 million users of the popular online game MapleStory have their personal data leaked when Nexon is hacked in 2011. In 2014, data belonging to 87 million customers is lost when 3 major credit card companies are compromised. Just 2 months later, telecom giant KT is hit, losing the personal data of 11.7 million users, representing 75% of its clientele. And the latest massive attack affects more than 10 million users of Korea's first online shopping mall, Interpark. It loses their names, addresses, birthdays, and phone numbers after their computers are hit with a malware attack. The strike occurred in May, but the company was not aware of it until July 11th. The following day, Interpark notified police, but did not issue a public post until 2 weeks later on its homepage. Its share price sunk to a 52-week low on Tuesday as frustrated online users organized for a class action lawsuit. Investigators believe hackers hooked themselves onto Interpark's database and had continuous access after malicious codes unknowingly downloaded by an employee from an email had opened a backdoor. Data security experts say that compromised access could have been avoided had the company followed guidelines to keep internal and external networks separate.
They didn't keep the network separated because to do that requires extra cost and work becomes inconvenient for the staff. This major data leak is a good reminder of the consequences of that.
For exposed customers, they could see a spike in spam text messages or be vulnerable to scams like voice phishing. For online security, experts suggest changing passwords regularly and making them sophisticated. Avoid downloading and clicking on any links from an unverified source, and closing out any online accounts that are no longer used. Eunice Kim, Business Daily.
Korea's 1.1 million farming households in rural villages have faced some unfavorable situations, including a dwindling population and an increasing income gap with their urban counterparts. So to revitalize these rural communities, the government is turning to smart agriculture. Our Lee Joo-young tells us more.
A drone is being used to spray pesticides covering roughly 6,900 square meters of farmland. What would take over an hour for a person to complete only takes about 10 minutes for a drone. This is an example of smart farming, which automates daily agricultural operations to help farmers make the best possible production decisions. To promote and develop such technologies, a government-supported agricultural assistance center opened its doors in Ansong City, 80 kilometers south of Seoul late last month, drawing attention from many.
As farms get bigger, I figured curiosity would not be enough. I felt the need for more in-depth knowledge, so I came to learn from farmers and take notes.
The biggest role of this center is to act as a platform to transform Korea's agricultural sector into the so-called sixth industry, which is the convergence of the primary, secondary, and tertiary industries to create greater added value. By providing education, mentoring, and counseling, as well as assistance in financing and sales at the center, the government aims to give farm incomes a boost, revitalize the rural economy, and create about 140,000 new jobs. This comes as the government is trying to grow the agricultural industry into a future growth engine and reach its targeted food exports of $8.1 billion this year. Lee Joo-young, Business Daily.
And that wraps it up for today. But we'll be back tomorrow with more at the same time, same place for your Business Daily. So don't forget to tune in then. Thanks for watching and goodbye.